Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
Content is the bridge to those people. And when I say content, it is everything basically front facing. So anything that your clients are interacting with from you, that's anything from emails to podcasts to blogs to your website to your social media posts. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? And when you hear it all like that, you're like, wow, that's so much. But all of that is the bridge to your client getting to you. And it's like, content isn't sales. Like I'm not closing the deal with my content, but I am letting people get to know me and get to know what I do and helping educate them and show that I'm valuable to meet their needs. So you can think of it like that. Like you really need content before you can sell people. You can't just sell people something, you need that bridge to get them there.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. You've probably heard the phrase content is king, but as an entrepreneur, you may also find it frustrating and overwhelming. Today's guest is here to help with a simple, effective system for content creation that removes the stress so you can be more consistent in what you share. Today, I welcome Emily Aborn to the Positively Living podcast. Emily is a content writer and owner of She Built This, a community for women entrepreneurs to build the dreams they have together. She has over 10 years' experience working with entrepreneurs in various roles and helps others create compelling content and copy through their branding. She lives in New Hampshire with her husband Jason and their dog Clyde. When not working, she can be found hiking, walking, cooking, reading, listening to music, or writing. Emily became a big fan of the Positively Living podcast and reached out to me to connect and invite me onto her She Built This podcast, which I've linked to in the show notes. I knew she'd be a perfect fit on this podcast, and her advice today showcases the simplicity and authenticity we talk about so often here. Today, Emily shares with us 3 things that trip us up most when it comes to content, and one of them is so sneaky, you might not even realize it's happening. She shares the 4 content types you need to ensure you have the right balance in what you share, and she walks us through the simple steps to plan out and create compelling and cohesive content. Now that you have the steps from Emily, you may still need support on when to do these steps and how to incorporate them into the rest of your schedule and your life. I can help you plan that in one strategy session. Go to positivelyproductive.com/strategy and be sure to use the promo code podcast for a very special listener discount. Welcome, Emily Aborn, to the Positively Living podcast. I am delighted to have you on. I've been on your podcast and I've been waiting to have this conversation with you. So let's get to it.
I'm so excited to be here, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, before we get into the content about content today, I'd love it if you'd share a bit about yourself, who you are and who you help and what lights you up.
Oh boy, let's try to make this interesting and not put people to sleep. So as you heard, my name is Emily Aborn and I actually live in New Hampshire with my husband and our dog Clyde. And I would say, so I've had like a really long journey in the entrepreneurial world. Like I've known since I was a little girl that I wanted to start a business. And I've also known since I was a little girl that I wanted to write, but I don't think I had the wherewithal to figure out like what that actually meant. So I started my first like neighborhood newspaper when I was 6 years old, and I would like handwrite each one and go around to all the neighbors and deliver them. And then when computers became kind of like more of a thing, I typed it using like all those wingding fonts. And like I used every font in the book. There was no such thing as branding for me. I was like, everything, just everything is my brand. And it was funny stuff like, the neighbors, like I would interview the neighbor kids and ask what their favorite food was and things like that. So I've always sort of been creating and coming up with like new ways to have businesses. And obviously, it wasn't until I became an adult that was actually like a reality. So I opened my first business when I was 28 with my husband. Actually, we weren't married at the time, but we owned a high-end luxury mattress store, which sounds really random, and it does have a reason, but I won't get into it all. So I really like focused on that for 5 years and realized it was great. Like the interacting with the customers was fantastic, but there was a lot of the pieces of the business that were not doing it for me. Like it was a lot of lonely days and a lot of it was retail, and that was just not for me. So we made the decision together to close the business. And that's sort of when I had to shift and figure out like, okay, what am I doing now? Because I thought this business was going to last me until I was 50. And so I had to think on my feet, and I went and got my real estate license, and I tried doing like virtual assistant stuff and social media management stuff. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And so the thread that kept winding through all of these things was writing. And like, even with the mattress store, I loved writing the blogs. I loved doing the marketing. Like it was always back to that for me. So one day, it took me until March of 2021. One day I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm done with the social media. Like I'm done doing things I don't want to do. And it's very scary to admit to yourself, I think, what you really want to do. And I had all this imposter syndrome and comparison syndrome. And I was like, no, I'm just going to focus on writing in my business. Like that's what I've always done. That's what I do best. I have a list of 77 industries I've written for. And I'm like, this is the thing. So I just did it. And I announced to the world, like, this is my new title. This is what I want to be focusing on. And I went for it. So that's kind of what got me to where I am today. What lights me up is like puzzles and reading and music and silly things like that. Yeah.
And dare I put words in your mouth, but writing lights you up.
Exactly.
And I love that you had that winding path. I mean, for like selfish reasons, I'm like, yeah, I had that winding path too. It's really remarkable, the number of parallels that we have had. But you get to discover what the threads are. You need to have that winding path in order to figure out what the thread is.
Definitely.
And to be able to say, yes, this is it for me. And then you came to it with true experience because, I mean, 77, that's like.
Well, I worked at Eastern Mountain Sports, which is like a outdoor company, kind of like REI or LO Bean. I was a copywriter and I didn't even know, like, I didn't ever think to myself, oh, this is me copywriting. You know what I mean? Like, I just did my job without thinking about what it was. So it was like things like that my whole life that just, when I looked back at all my jobs, I was like, I have done this every single place that I've worked by accident most of the time.
Right. And this is another good point. And even though this is slightly off topic, I think it's so important and inspirational for fellow entrepreneurs is that you start to see these threads and then you realize those moments that you weren't thinking about. You were doing it. It lit you up. That's your zone of genius right there. You were in your zone of genius. And sometimes that's the hardest one to spot because it does feel so natural.
It's funny. I think sometimes we expect like passion or inspiration to fall from the sky, but so often passion and inspiration are found in doing the thing, just sitting down and doing it. And then you're like, wow, I am very passionate and inspired.
There you go. So what we may find out today in this conversation is that we are, inspired to write and to create content. But if it's not our zone of genius, you're going to help us create a stress-free system that will keep us moving and at least be consistent about it and then figure out, where we can fill in the gaps and where we can find the help we need. So with that, let's start with the concept of content and just to kind of back up a bit and set the scene and the foundation of why it matters and what we're trying to achieve with it.
Well, I think to your point, maybe that isn't what you're passionate about or what your zone of genius is, but you are passionate about your business. and you are passionate about helping the people that you are helping through your business. And like content is the bridge to those people. And when I say content, it is everything basically front facing. So anything that your clients are interacting with from you, that's anything from emails to podcasts to blogs to your website to your social media posts. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? And when you hear it all like that, you're like, wow, that's so much. But all of that is the bridge to your client getting to you. And it's like, content isn't sales. Like I'm not closing the deal with my content, but I am letting people get to know me and get to know what I do and helping educate them and show that I'm valuable to meet their needs. So you can think of it like that. Like you really need content before you can sell people. You can't just sell people something, you need that bridge to get them there.
I really like that visual because it's leading people down a path, right? And allowing them to get to know you, to understand what it is that your expertise, right? As well as your passion, all of those things.
And like, a little bit about you. Like you and I know that we like each other because we see each other's content. We're like, oh, that girl gets me, So it's
Totally.
Things like that. Yeah.
So given that, this idea that content, it's not the sale, it's the bridge, it's the path to lead people to you, to be able to connect, to show your value, to show your authenticity. So that makes sense, I guess, is what I'm saying. But where do we get tripped up? What's going on where we're like, content, and we run the other way and go, play a game or something or watch Netflix?
Well, so I think the first thing that we get tripped up by is just being overwhelmed. What I hear a lot is either people are too overwhelmed with how much time they think is involved in planning it, or they don't know what to say. And then the other area I see people getting tripped up where they might not even know that they're getting tripped up is all they are doing is sharing one kind of content. And they're not realizing that there's a lot of different kinds of content you need to actually be sharing to get to that sale point. And that we can touch on that in a little bit, but there's 4 basic types that you need to be focusing on. And when you're not filling out all of those rungs, it's not balanced.
Gotcha. Well, that's, I think, a great place to go now. So if we're tripping up on how much time it takes to create, that makes sense. The don't know what to say, I think that's a big one. And I think I've been there before. And it helped me to step into my own authenticity and to be real and to share about who I am and what I'm passionate about. I can't remember if it was Jim Rohn. There's a quote relating to that. You're not selling the thing, but you're selling your passion, share your passion. And that's where you will connect with your clients. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of those things. So dig right in. Help us. Where do we go from here, Emily?
Okay, let's start with the types of content that you can share, because I think that's helpful to kind of get your brain flowing with ideas of what you can share, because that is something we all struggle with. So I like to think of it as kind of like a garden. Okay. When you're planting a garden, you have the soil, right? And the soil is like those foundational pieces. Like you want to share your why with your audience. You want to share your purpose, who you are, like how it's kind of like the backstory of why you got into what you're doing, your big mission, who you help and how you help them. So those are like the foundational pieces. So for example, for me, as a person that is running a women's entrepreneurship community, the soil for me is really that backstory of why I got into doing what I do. And it is a quite compelling story, but that's my big why, and like knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing. So my purpose and who I want to help through that. So then we have to add the water, right? So the water is like we're educating our audience, we're nurturing our audience, we're sharing valuable stuff that they can use right away. Like you are giving some of your knowledge away for free each and every day. That is part of the deal. And that helps to set you apart in your industry and in your field as the expert that you are. And then we have the sun. And the sun is like my favorite part. This is what I mean. Like you can get them out of balance, right? So the sun is like the inspiration, the sunny parts of your person, whatever parts of your personality are like light and fun, the light and fun things in your life, in your business. Yeah. Like I love to share cute photos of my dog sleeping. That's kind of the sun. And everybody has different things in their personal lives that they feel comfortable with sharing and don't feel comfortable with sharing. But it's kind of like, the behind the scenes stuff. What makes you you? And then we have the wind. And this is the other part I do see people tending more towards. And you want to make sure they're all equal. So the wind is like directing people to your products, directing people to your services, the promotional stuff. You're doing that workshop next week. You're doing this podcast, like me, 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 me. It's fantastic. And we need it. But we don't only want to be talking about me. And here's what I'm doing. And here's how you can spend money with me. So do you see how they all sort of have to balance out?
Absolutely. And I can even see like where I've been imbalanced before, or unbalanced, or lacking in balance, or however we're going to say it. I can see where I've tended and why, because there's actually been times when, coming from this very heart-centered, I want to give and I want to help and I want to bring value, that it was a challenge for me to say, okay, now here's something you can, buy or whatever. So I would say, on the wind side, if you will, it was challenging for me to be like, and here's how you work with me that involves payment. I mean, it took me a while to be like, but this is part and parcel of all that I offer. And, you put it out there. It's not like you're forcing people to do this. You are offering these different options, and it does need that balance. It can't all be free, or suddenly you're a not-for-profit and you didn't intend to be.
Exactly. And you could really think about the wind like you're growing more gardens, right? Because the wind takes the seeds and spreads it to the next person. So, like, you are perpetuating this cycle. Like, that's what we need to remember when it comes to selling people things. We're not selling them something that they don't want. Like, that's how I always used to feel when I was selling mattresses. I'm like, I feel like I'm selling them something they don't want. Not true. I'm selling them a good night's sleep. I'm selling them a comfortable bed. You know what I mean? So it's about reframing that and remembering that is going to affect their lives in a positive way too.
Yeah, that's so good. And of course, my job is always to overthink things. I'm very good at that. It's talk about a zone of genius.
Same.
So, with the wind here, are we talking about directing them to paid or to free, or to both? Like, what does that incorporate?
Yeah, it could be to both. So, like, I'll use myself again as an example. I might send people to a workshop, or I might share about my content bundle, or I might share about my podcast, so all of those, or an opt-in that I have. So all of those things fall under wind. Basically, all of your products, services, and media that you want people to encounter.
Gotcha. Okay. I love that. This garden, we have the soil, the water, the sun, and the wind.
And like, you can have, I love the concept of mise en place, and I'll talk more about that. But like, I love having all of when I set up my workstation every day, like, I make sure that everything I need to do that day is in front of me. So if I need to reference a book for something that I'm working on, the book is next to me. If I need a certain notebook for what I'm working on, the notebook is next to me. And you can do this when it comes to planning your content too. So kind of mise en placing before you're going to tackle this and saying, all right, what elements do I need to get myself prepared to do this? And you can just brainstorm in every single one of those categories. All right, what tips do I have? What education do I have? What do I want to lead people to? What do I want to share about myself? What's a funny story? Like those kinds of things. You can just sit down and list them all, like a huge brain dump. I want to go back to what you always say, which is like, you have to figure out what works for you. And so for some people, it might be more effective for them to think of it in like a month by month approach. So a brain dump is fantastic for some people. Some people might like that month to month approach. Some people, I mean, I'm sure you can come up with many creative ways to do this that work for yourself, but keeping those 4 categories in mind as you do.
Yep. And I will just interject quickly, and it does connect to another way we bond, which is over food. Mise en place is what's used by chefs, right?
Yes.
In restaurants, that everything is in its place. And of course, that's an organizing concept that means that your environment is going to be conducive to what you need to do. So that right there, that's a really important tip. This also ties in from a productivity standpoint to the idea of batching your content, right? And taking that time to say, I'm either going to be planning it out or I'm going to be creating it together at a certain time, as opposed to trying to be reactive and be like, oh, I need to post something now, or, oh, I need to do an email. And I mean, ask me how I know, because I've been there.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. It's a huge part of what I do for clients is say, okay, let's not be so reactive. We're going to be proactive now. So your point about that and the environment is really important. So then the next step, of course, is saying, all right, so how do I want to look at this content? And month by month, I actually do like month by month because I also theme my months. And right. Okay. And that helps because you can go in so many different directions depending upon what you do, what you're passionate about, what you're sharing, the type of business that you have. But at some point, you need to have it's sort of like boundaries or a container, if you will, right? To say, okay, this will be the focus because otherwise, I'm running wild and free and everybody's overwhelmed and nobody can like focus in on what's happening, right?
Yeah, I also give my month a theme. I announce my theme, but you don't need to announce your theme. And I use it from everything from my podcast to my emails to my social media posts. And again, like you said, it's not like this rigid, like, nope, I can only talk about this month. Like I'll use myself as an example. January is about visibility. It's not like that's all I'm going to like every day is not going to be about visibility, but my podcast will be about visibility. The people I have on my podcast, so it's all just like it's all contained within those guardrails, like you said.
Right. And it ties in. So to your point, it doesn't have to be exact, like, is this absolutely like that part of that theme, or does it complement or tie into it? Guess what? Your rules,
right?
Your game,
right.
Your rules, you get to make it up. But this is also trying to keep your mind from going everywhere and not being sure what to do next, which goes back to your point of overwhelm, right?
Right. And like for me in planning things, it helps you plan who's going to be on your show, who you're going to have at your workshop. Like then it gives you a filter, which I know you also love.
Yes, I do.
To say yes and no to things. You're like, well, this doesn't fall into what I'm focusing on that month, so it's a no. And I like that too.
Yeah, it's managing expectations. And so, given that I do the same thing with the podcast, I can say to someone, okay, you want to talk about, this particular topic, and I'm not going to be focusing on that topic until this month. And if you're good with that time frame, that manages both our expectations. We know that maybe we don't need to have a conversation right now. We can have a conversation in 2 months about next year's planning. And so it really helps you with so many of the decisions, and it's the decision making, I think, that can throw us. Okay, awesome. What's next?
All right. So let's say personally, I like to sit down and realistically think about 3 months at a time. Like I think a little bit, further than that is a little hard. And that gives you also kind of quarters to work with rather than a whole year, which can be overwhelming. You can do it. For some people, it might work fantastically. You're like, I'm on a roll. I'm going to do the whole year. But for me, I like to just think of 3 months at a time because it also gives me time to reassess like what's been working the past 3 months. So like we talked about, we kind of give it a theme. So I'll just give you some examples. Like for me, January is visibility. For you, it might be systems.
It is.
Oh, well, I just made that up.
There you go.
For a health coach, it might be resetting. February, you might do love and communication as entrepreneurs. You might do positivity. A health coach might do self-care. So those are just kind of like it can be a really broad theme. It doesn't need to be like, okay, I'm focusing on weightlifting services this month. Or, that's actually a really good one. So I don't know, but it can be really broad. So then from there, you want to kind of take a bird's eye view of like, what do I do on a monthly basis? How many blogs do I write every month? How many emails do I expect myself to write every month? How many podcasts do I do every month? How many social media posts do I realistically expect from myself every month? This is like the big rocks of your content, right? So when you're thinking about emails and newsletters and podcasts and blogs, those are big pieces of content, like nice big chunks. And the magic of a nice big chunk of content is you can break it down into smaller pieces. So you write those 2 emails, you just gave yourself 4 social media posts. You wrote that blog, you just gave yourself, if you have a blog with 10 tips, you just gave yourself 10 social media posts. So it's kind of like if you tell a story in an email, there's a social media post. You can use that story again. So I love that idea of like, don't think about, oh my gosh, every day I need to come up with 7 pieces of content. It's like, where can I take the big rocks, the big chunks of my content, and then break those down into smaller pieces so that I can spread it across everything that I'm doing. And then that ties us back to that cohesive theme, because then everything is like, oh, you know what? I did read that in Emily's email. It's funny that I also heard it on her podcast. It's like, I meant to do that.
I think that's such an important point too. And I want to highlight it and bring this out because I know this is a place where I tripped up in thinking that when I would create content, it always has to be new. It always has to be fresh. And the idea of repurposing, the idea that to reframe this and think, no, we're making it cohesive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people think of repurposing as like cutting and pasting. It's not that, it is exactly that, making it cohesive. And furthermore, I hate to break it to you, but most of the time, our people have not seen all of our content. So, like, most people aren't going to know. You have your loyal fans that they're like, oh, I heard that in your podcast too. But most people don't see it in both places or all 3 places. So you're not repeating yourself. Your message never gets tired and old. You can say the same things more than once.
Exactly. They're probably not hearing it as often as you feel like they're hearing it or seeing it. But I do have to say this. I got over the fact that I say the same thing over and over again because those things that I'm saying are important to me and to share because I believe that they will make a difference. And I mean, you quoted back some terms that I use to me because you've listened to what I have to say.
Yeah.
And that's really, really good because that means that it's connecting. It's not just about someone reading what you wrote or hearing what you have to say. It's about them actually making the connection to it and having the aha moments and saying, I get that. I'm going to try that. That's how it's going to make a difference. That's how it's going to reach your people and change lives.
I love that. First of all, you're right. That's exactly why I could quote you back to you, because you're consistent with what you say. And I think the other thing we need to remember is like not everyone consumes content in the same way. Some people really like emails. There are people, I know you always think people hate emails, people hate emails. Not true. I like somebody coming into my email box because I have time to sit with it, digest it, read it. Like, especially when someone comes with a great story in my email, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be good. Like I get my cup of tea and sit back and read their story. I don't like tea, but if I did. And some people really love podcasts and they're going to consume your podcast like ear candy. So it's just like some people love reels. I mean, I could sit there and scroll reels all day long. I'll never do one, but I can sit there and watch other people. So it's also about like when you repurpose it, you give people more opportunities to consume it in a way that they are welcome to.
Yeah. And also to catch the tidbits, because I know this is a really huge thing. And again, it took me a while to get into that as well. The quick sound bites, because people are busy, distracted, all the things that we love to fight the good fight about. But the fact is, that's life. So if they catch something where it's that aha moment, that quick thing where I'm saying, okay, let's talk about clutter in a different way than you normally think about it. Everything in your environment, the people and what you do and the choices you make and the information that comes in, all of that, is it serving you or sabotaging you? And then it's like, oh, wait, let me think about that. Then if that's something that touches upon your life in a way where you're like, I get, things that make you go, then you're like, okay, let me look into this more. And they can find it in other places. They can find longer conversations about it.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point.
So I wanted to highlight that point because I think it's so important that repurposing, I've talked about that with Young Pratt on the podcast. And it is so important, this idea that you have these big rocks, so this big content, that's where you're putting in the effort, right, to create this good content that showcases your expertise and shares what's important. Then you use it and you repurpose it, not just cut and paste, but taking these concepts and saying, how would it look as a reel or a post, or how would I put it into an email? And you're not reinventing the wheel. Thank you. Thank you. I love that. But you're also giving content that's needed. And like we said, is cohesive and consistent. So from there, where do we go?
So then, I mean, this is old school, but I just have like a table. Like I use Notion, and I think you do too. And so Notion has this great tool now with Finally, which is just a standard table. And I put the date and I put the social media platform all across the way, however many I have. For example, I have a Facebook group, a podcast, my own Instagram, and my business's Instagram, LinkedIn, and that's it. So I will just put all those things right across and the date. And then I fill it in like this day is this. Now, the great thing is sometimes we have standard stuff, like sometimes you're going to feature a client every Monday. Sometimes you're going to give a tip every Tuesday. Sometimes you're going to focus on something about wellness every Wednesday. Also, you don't need to announce that it's a tips Tuesday or a motivation Monday or a wellness Wednesday. Like that can just be your dirty little secret, but you can use that to help frame what you're going to put into each and every day.
Where were you 2 years ago when I was in my full awkwardness? It's Tuesday, so I'm giving you tips, but that's fine too. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's totally fine to do that. I'm just saying, like, people are like, I don't want someone to be listening and think that is cheesy because you can make it not cheesy by just not saying it. You can do a feel good Friday. You can do a friends Friday. You don't need to say, you just post a picture of you and your friend and you feel good on Friday. So I literally just break it down like that. Now, with this part, this is where I would not do this probably for 3 months in advance. I would do this for like 2 weeks in advance because you want to be flexible in what you're sharing. I know that I'm going to be on your podcast and this is going to come out in January. So I'm going to I don't know when exactly in January, I'm like, I got to leave some leeway for things like that because I want to share when I'm on Lisa's episode. For example, if somebody submits a great blog and I'm like, "Ooh, I really want to share this blog." I want to leave some space for those kinds of things. So fill in those spots and then that's when I just sit down once a week and go through it all and make sure everything is written and scheduled out for the week to come because I don't like to be thinking every single day, what do I need to post? What do I need to share? I just use you can use Facebook Creator Studio or something. Instagram now you can post right from your computer. So those I don't schedule out. I just do them manually. But yeah, you can just put them all in and then you sit back and you're like, wow, now I don't have to worry about this for an entire week or 2 weeks. However long for my clients, I do 2 weeks in advance. So I sit down and plan 2 weeks of their stuff. They approve it, they schedule it, and then it's done.
There you go. And where do you keep the content that you are working on when you're doing the writing or you're, gathering images or other things to go with that content?
So I I used to use Google Docs and you can literally just set it up with you could put, your whole month at the top or 2 weeks at the top and then day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Now I use Notion and you can just drag. It's so nice because you can drag and drop images in. You can click out to your podcast. It's really nice to have a project management tool. But if I've seen people, again, it has to be what works for you. Like I have a friend who uses the calendar app and she just puts in every post and puts it in her calendar as an event. So it pops up in the morning at 7:00. She copies and pastes it from her calendar with the photo. You can add photos to your calendar thing. It's amazing. Post it to social media.
I actually think that is a great suggestion because it's wherever it's going to pop up and you're going to be able to take what you need and go with it. Some people will do spreadsheets. I actually, for the promotional dates and when I'm posting what, I actually use Google Sheets because a spreadsheet works well for that. And now I'm using ClickUp, for the other content that I need. And I'm rather liking that. I do use Notion as well. And I've been talking about each of these platforms on the podcast because they can all work in different ways. It's figuring out kind of what makes you happy. You can do all these things that we talked about in Trello as well and have a calendar view. It depends on who's doing it with you, if you're doing it on your own. And also to your point, when you need to have it, whether you're scheduling this out, that also depends upon how many you're doing. There's nothing that says that you have to do a certain number of posts or emails or anything for the month. I think it really goes back to consistency. Would you agree?
Totally. And that's why, I recently said consistency sounds like work, right?
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to remember is consistency To your point, it has to be what works for you. So it doesn't have to be difficult because it has to feel good to you. And it goes back to how many platforms too that we're committing to. Like realistically, when you post a social media post, you have to know that you have to be a part of that conversation after you post it. And so if that isn't reasonable for you to do that on 10 platforms, you might want to think about which platforms you need to declutter.
Did you use, was it the post and ghost phrase? Is that what you say?
Oh,
Because
yes, post and ghost.
see, and I kept that in mind because you're right. Social media is social. And this is what we talked about. And we discussed this on your podcast. And this idea of really limiting, and I mean that in a really good way. It's not limiting like, oh, then I don't have as many options. It's more like limiting as in I don't have to do as much, to say, where's my best place to show up where I enjoy it the most, where it's effective, where my people are.
Yeah. And you start to learn, I definitely think I want to encourage, like, don't just say, oh, well, then I'm only going to do Instagram. Take time and experiment with what works. Like I know that LinkedIn, I make a lot of connections on there and they're valuable business connections. But I know that every single time I post something on Instagram about a product or service, I get a client. And I don't know why that is the case, but that is what happens. And like, I wouldn't think Instagram for me, I'd be like, that's not the best marketing tool, but it works every time. So it's just something to I've never gotten a client from LinkedIn, but I've made a lot of good connections that have introduced me to the right people.
Same. LinkedIn, it's got a different vibe. And so I do, an automatic, like, okay, here's the content and I will quickly post that. It's limited, right? So it's like a touch point. There's a quick touch point, and because of how it works there, I don't have to worry about ghosting because there's really not a lot of interaction. It's not where I play, but it's more informational, like you said, because I make connections. Facebook groups is where I make the best connections. So go figure. But you learn as you go. But again, it's about being selective and intentional about where you're putting this information. So whatever it is that you are creating here in terms of this content, you get to choose. And the one piece of advice I would add to this is to start slowly, to start on a smaller scale, where instead of looking to someone else and saying, okay, well, they do, 4 blog posts a month, or they do, your weekly emails or what. No, don't forget about what they do. And think about, when you're looking at this monthly content, what could I do reasonably? For a long time, I've gone with a monthly email because that's the bandwidth that I had to touch base and to be able to, check in. And it worked. And I'm growing it. It's different now because I have different systems in place. But the key was I don't want to leave everyone hanging, but this is what I can do. And that's what you have to ask yourself.
And I think it can help you also to ease in to when you have a fear of being visible or being in people's inboxes. Like for a long time, I thought, oh my gosh, a weekly email is way too many. I'm just going to be bothering people. But then I changed my mindset about it and what I'm sharing in my email. And I have a totally different approach about it. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could send them 3 emails a week because I have so many things I want to say to them.
Because it's content based, or I should say, really, it's the value of the content. And you are knowing now, you know what you want to share. You have a plan for sharing it, and now you're excited to share it.
Right. So I think, yes. So starting slowly can help to ease you kind of to that point where you're like, oh yeah, I really do have so much great stuff to share with people. So
I love that. Okay. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Is there anything else that you're thinking, oh, but I really want you to think this as well? Let me share this.
I always wish I had a good thing to say here, but I don't. No, I just want to encourage people again, like you don't need to be everywhere just because everyone else looks like they're everywhere. Pick what works for you.
That bears repeating. So I'm glad you said it, because you have a very simple system here that's very encouraging, that doesn't involve as much work as we think it does. And yet it will bring about the consistency and then ultimately the conversion that we're looking for, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so before we have a little fun with our rapid wrap up, tell everyone where we can find you to keep working on our content.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. It's pretty easy. It's just emilyaborn.com. And what I'm loving doing is helping people really hash out that 3 months at a time, where they basically get to sit back, relax, and I go through all of their stuff for them and create that 3 month plan for them. That's really what's like lighting me up lately as far as my work goes. So emilyaborn.com, and I pretty much write it all.
Right. And I will put that link in the show notes along with link to Instagram and your podcast. Definitely recommend listening to that. So with that in mind, you ready for a rapid wrap up?
I have been so ready. I've listened to every single one of your Positively Living playlists so I can like add a good song.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. Okay. So speaking of the song, that's where we start. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance.
Okay. I had to go with Madonna here because I am a big fan of a choreographed dance. Like I like to choreograph my own dance. So I'm going to say Madonna, Like a Prayer. I also did a video about the Crusades in high school with that song at the beginning, and it just like will forever be in my mind.
I really wish I could share that video as well. But the song will for sure be on the Positively Living podcast, Spotify Dance Playlist Volume 3. Love it. Okay. How about a quote or a mantra that inspires me that I love to share?
Well, I'll use one. I've heard a lot of your guests share ones of their own, so I'll use mine. When it comes to things feeling overwhelming or that you just have like that brain dump sheet that is miles and miles long, I use the mantra, the only way through is through, because we can sit on our floor and cry and whine about how much we have to do, but really it comes down to sitting down and taking one small step at a time.
That's a life lesson right there. Love that. Okay. And how about a resource, a book or an app, anything really that's made your life better?
Yeah, so I live in New Hampshire, like I said, and I love the All Trails app because it gets me outside and exploring new trails. You can do it for however you feel like energetically. So if you're like, I need a really easy hike, you can look up an easy hike, you can look up a hard hike, see if dogs are allowed. It's amazing. And it works all over the world.
Okay, I love it. That's a great recommendation. Okay, and last but definitely not least, what or whom are you grateful for today, Emily?
So I have been lately reframing the things that I'm overwhelmed by to gratitude. And I'll give you an example from like getting ready for Thanksgiving. So I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much laundry to do. I have to make this. I have to go grocery shopping. I have to clean my house. The list goes on, right? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a house to clean. I have clothes to wash. I have food to cook. So anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed about something, whatever it is, angry at your spouse, angry at your dog, angry at your client, you can turn it back to gratitude and like, wow, I have clients that I'm working with. I'm also very grateful for today and this opportunity to share with you and chat with you.
Oh, as am I. And that is a beautiful reframe. Thank you for that. I mean, I am so grateful for you that we have connected on so many different levels and to have you here today. So thank you, Emily, for shining your light in this world so brightly and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.